Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Access to Democracy. I'm your guest host, Steve Francisco, and I'm very pleased to welcome our special guest today, Sangeeta Jain, who is a child support magistrate in the Hennepin County Family Court in Minneapolis. Welcome, Sangeeta, your first time on Access to Democracy.
It is, and thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's our pleasure. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from, and how did you come to practice law?
Well, I consider myself a Minnesotan. I've spent most of my life here. I was born in India and emigrated to this country when I was 9, and I went to law school and high school here, and was very concerned about social justice issues. Was a debater in high school and ended up being in law school and having a career of public service.
Were there members of your family, perhaps, who were in law, or are you the first person in your family to become a lawyer?
When I was growing up, I was supposed to go to medical school. The women in our family went to medical school. So this was a new road that I went on, and it has been a wonderful journey.
And so what was it specifically that sort of drove you toward the study of law and practicing law rather than medicine?
Well, when I was growing up, my parents were in the U.S. and we were brought up by my grandparents in India. And my father would tell me stories about the freedom revolution and how an independent judiciary is integral to a great democracy. And I grew up with that philosophy, and it was a great upbringing. And he taught me about public service and human rights. And that became part of who I was. So when I came to this country, I was always thinking about how we could make the world into a better place and how I could serve our community in a positive manner. And my forte was in language skills and working on community issues. And it was something that, a path that I was never envisioning, but became the one I chose, and I'm very happy that I did.
And so when you came here, you went to law school at the University of San Diego, at Hamlin University Law School, and earned your Master's of Law in San Diego. And I notice in your biography, Sangeeta, that you've also been a prosecutor previously. Tell us about that experience as a prosecutor. What career lessons or life lessons did you draw from that experience?
Well, when I was in law school, criminal law was my favorite class. So that's what I've decided. I decided at that point that that's what I wanted to do. So in San Diego, I applied at the San Diego District Attorney's Office and was offered a position there. And I learned that it's important to fight for justice. And it was a great opportunity to serve the community in the state of California, and eventually I also moved here as a prosecutor. And
you worked in the Ramsey County Attorney's Office
yes, I did.
as well.
And it is, as a prosecutor, you do pure legal service and litigation. It is a forum where you're given basically an ability to go out and practice what you think is right and just for the people of that state. And it was a great opportunity to learn the litigation skills. My first day when I was working as a district attorney's office, I came in, I thought I would be trained, I would get walk around the office, and I was given a file at 7:30, and I was told that your jury is waiting for you in room X.
Not lots of time to prepare.
No time whatsoever.
And probably judges that were not inclined to give continuances to new prosecutors either.
Well, I wasn't entitled to a continuance. This was just the training that office
just
gave.
for the training, yeah.
Well, and so I went in, I talked to my police officers, I started picking a jury that day at 8:30, and while I was picking the jury, I was reading the file. So that's how I was trained. And had a lot of litigation experience my first year, and I didn't know anything about picking a jury until I was in that courtroom, and you learn by fire, and it was a wonderful experience. And I learned to think and talk on my feet, and learn that it's okay to make mistakes, to say the wrong things, because it is almost impossible
That's how you learn,
to be perfect.
right?
Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of your more recent work. Your title right now is you are a magistrate in the family court in Hennepin County. What is a magistrate? What do you do as a magistrate, and how does that differ from the title of a judge?
Well, I'm a child support magistrate in Hennepin County and also in the 3rd Judicial District, which is the Rochester area. And basically my job is to serve families in economic areas. So that deals with establishing paternity, collecting child support, establishing child support, and enforcing that obligation, including driver's license suspension, as well as contempt and other enforcement remedies that are out there. So it's an opportunity to provide services to families that are in need of economic resources, and it gives me a chance to deal with litigants who have never been in the courtroom. And
it can be a very intimidating experience for people who don't know the law, and maybe their only contact with government is ever that they have to go to court to deal with a custody issue or some of the legal issues that come before your court. So it probably is the case that sometimes you deal with very tense situations, people who are very anxious and concerned about what's going to happen with their cases. How do you diffuse some of that anxiety and put people at ease who appear before you?
Well, we have about 12 hearings per day and about 30 minutes per hearing, if you look at how much time is available. So it is a format where you have to allow individuals to come in, make sure that they're being treated respectfully, given equal access, given an opportunity to participate in a safe, respectful manner.
Do most of them have lawyers, or are they what we call pro se? They're representing themselves.
Majority of the cases are pro se. The attorneys that are present are from the county. So they're present, and this is their first encounter or second or third encounter with the judicial system. So generally what I do is I provide some sort of format, some information to them about why they're here, what they can expect, and lay some ground rules to inform them that they need to be respectful, listen, and that they're presenting evidence where I'll be the decision maker, and I will hear them, give them access, and they will have an opportunity to be heard in court.
Now, if you make a decision as a magistrate, is it the case that if the parties are dissatisfied with it, do they have a right to appeal that decision to the district court, or are they bound by the decisions made by the magistrate?
Well, every individual has the right to seek review, and the initial review that they have the right to seek is through a district court judge. So as a child support magistrate, and I know that you asked me earlier, my job is to focus on these economic issues, and a district court judge deals with panoply of issues, criminal court, juvenile, family, civil, etc. So we have very limited jurisdiction, and in that jurisdiction, our job is to make sure that we provide expedited services that are reasonable, fair, independent, and give a decision that is based
So-
on the merits of the case.
So you're not issuing warrants or subpoenas or things like that. You're doing this other work there.
Well, I
for the most
can
part.
recommend warrants, so it's a limited power that a child support magistrate
Right.
has.
The issue of issues surrounding child custody are sometimes very contentious and very difficult. Do you have any sense at this time how many people in Minnesota are under orders to pay child support, and do we have any idea about the economic impact of that? I don't know if you would happen to know that just offhand or not, and it's okay, but...
Well, in Minnesota, I know that collections in 2010 was about $600 million.
It's pretty
and that's how much
substantial,
money was
right.
collected. And children that were served were approximately 270,000 children. That is the population of St. Paul. So we are serving a lot of families, and if you look at statistics, 45% or so of children are born out of wedlock. And if you look at who is in area which is considered poor, who are poor families, about 50% of the families are headed by a single parent. So this money that is brought in is very, very important to the standard of living of the child, and really enhances the value and opportunities that are available for children.
And of course, we do know, and you see this every day too, parents who are delinquent on their custody or their child support obligations. What remedies does the court have at its disposal to deal with parents who are in these types of situations? And if I could, the other thing I want to ask about too right away is, given the recent economic recession that we've had, where a lot of people who may owe child support have seen they've lost their jobs, been laid off, or they've had their work hours reduced, how have the courts responded to that?
Well, this economic recession has impacted all families, and we've seen individuals who have held long-term employment, receiving unemployment, and then working for $8, $9 an hour at Menards. So it has really changed the way families function. So our job is to be cognizant of the issues that the families are facing, and remember that there is very limited amount of monies that are being distributed into two different households, and being respectful of that issue. And yes, tensions can be very high when you have parents who are grappling with financial issues, parenting time issues, and we see that quite a bit in court. Just another day, I had a case where the individual parent who had custody said she didn't want any child support, and I learned later she was in fear of her life because she was concerned about making sure she was safe, and that was why she was seeking not to have support. So there's a lot of information that we don't have access to, but when we see individuals, we try our best to obtain information that's relevant to issuing a decision that's just.
And so it sounds like the courts are trying to work with individuals who find themselves in these situations where they may have been laid off or reduced hours, but that doesn't, the fact that a person has been laid off doesn't nullify a child support obligation, obviously.
Well, our current laws provide for a minimum support obligation of $50, and they also provide for something that's called a self-support reserve. That's how much an individual needs to meet their basic needs. So we're talking about from the perspective of the non-custodial parent. So a lot of cases are just a $50 per month child support order, and that does recognize limited ability, limited income, etc. And when a person's income temporarily reduces, we provide in Hennepin County access to a parenting a program that helps you find employment, address criminal issues, etc., so you can become more employable. And then we set up review hearings to allow individuals to have the opportunity to become employed and then come back in to set up support.
That actually raises a good question too. Unfortunately, there are a number of parents who happen to be incarcerated who have outstanding child support obligations. How does the family court deal with those individuals? Is the support obligation suspended while they're incarcerated? Is it somehow adjusted? How does that work?
most child support agencies are bringing in motions to suspend support when an individual is incarcerated. So that is occurring throughout the state, and it alleviates the burden of providing financially when you're unable to do so. And I think the state of Minnesota is very reasonable in how they approach that. So the financial burden is not imposed on an individual who is generally unable to pay.
We've all heard the phrase, and I know you have, justice delayed is justice denied. I don't know exactly who said that, but we've all heard it, I'm sure. In Minnesota, in the family court, do you have a sense, or at least in Hennepin County perhaps, what is the docket like? What is the waiting time for resolving custody disputes and issues from the time that they first come to the courthouse and file papers until the time that parties can appear before a magistrate such as yourself?
Well, I can talk about it in two fronts. One, in the child support process, we're called the expedited process. So an individual can expect that one of us will be issuing a decision within 30 days. Generally, district court judges have 90 days to issue a decision. So you have 30 days to issue a decision. That means money is flowing very quickly into the other household. In addition, for calendaring, there are federal timelines that we're supposed to meet, and there are 60 days to 90 days timeline in when you can access or have a hearing set. So most of the state, you can get a hearing within 2 or 3 months. That is still a long time, but it's not as long as in other types of cases. Now, in child custody cases, most of the districts have embraced a program called the Early Neutral Evaluation Program. So when you come in, you can mediate basically or use an alternative dispute resolution mechanism.
Speeds things up, doesn't it?
Yes, it makes it much faster. And so the courts are working on getting results quicker to families and providing finality, especially for children.
And isn't it important, too, that if our courts are going to be able to administer justice, they have to be adequately funded? I know there have been some issues in recent times about cutbacks in state spending, which have affected the courts, too. Have these types of issues affected the court's ability to function up to this point, or would you say they have or have not?
Well, funding is integral to a system being able to function effectively, and it has the amount of funding available has impacted what services are provided. When I started working in 1999 as a magistrate, filing fees were, I think, 1/10 of the cost they are now. So the shifting of cost has occurred because the court is unable to absorb the need for services with the amount of resources available to provide the services. And they've been using innovative ways to be able to provide the same resources when there's an expanding market and more need for services. So the more money that's available, the better service you can provide. And custody cases, generally we used to have a custody evaluation, and I know a lot of districts are unable to provide inexpensive evaluation process, and so the court isn't as informed when they're issuing that.
And if you're not as
decision.
informed, you can't make good decisions, perhaps.
Well,
I mean,
hopefully
we make
we're
better
making-
decisions when we have access to relevant, good information, right?
Well, I would think the quality of decision would improve, but we try to make the best decisions possible.
That you can with
Yes.
what you have, right?
Yes.
How does Minnesota's, I'm sure you talk to colleagues of yours in other states around the country. Do you have a subjective impression of how Minnesota's family court system compares to other family court systems around the country? Are we doing well here in Minnesota? Are there things that other states could learn from what we're doing here in Minnesota, or perhaps things that we should be doing in Minnesota that we're not?
Well, I also had the privilege of working in California in their child support system. So I know I can directly compare that. But I know statistically, nationally, we are doing better than most states. We're very good at collecting. We don't spend a lot of money to collect support, and we provide a lot of resources in courts and through the child support offices to provide child support services. So I think we are role model nationally and in providing child support services.
One of the points in your biography that I took note of is you have served on a task force, Minnesota Supreme Court task force, on gender and racial fairness in the courts. I think for many Minnesotans, we're aware of disparities in the criminal justice system, particularly racial disparities. There have been many stories in the news about racial profiling and other such issues. We know from statistical evidence that people of color are more likely to be stopped by the police, detained, arrested, charged, convicted, and incarcerated than perhaps other individuals. Tell us a little bit about that work, and do you see similar disparities, gender and racial disparities, in the administration of the family court system?
Well, I did serve on both of those committees, and with Justice Page and Chief Justice Gildea, and it was an amazing opportunity to look at disparities and biases that may possibly exist in our system as a whole. So in the Racial Fairness Committee, we looked at how sentencing occurred, who was convicted, and how race affects the outcome, and tried to isolate factors that would minimize that disparity in occurring. And in a Gender Fairness Committee, we looked at what barriers there are in accessing the courtroom, safety issues, domestic violence issues, and came out with a recommendation to the court as to how they can ensure more safety for individuals in the courtroom arena, and how to better access the system equally based upon gender and race.
This issue of obviously courtroom security made front page headlines, unfortunately, right here in Minnesota with the violent incident. I believe it was in Lake County in northeastern Minnesota. And it wasn't that long ago that one could freely walk into the Hennepin County Government Center and not really have to go through metal detectors. They have those devices now, and everybody coming into the court tower is required to go through them. So there are obviously additional things that can be done to make our courts a more secure place for the litigants and for the judges and magistrates.
Well, I do serve in Hennepin County, but I also go to the 3rd Judicial District. When I'm
Rochester, right.
As an example, when I'm in Waseca County, there are no metal detectors. There are multiple entrances, and the individual sitting in front of me may have a gun, and I don't know anything about it. So this is just a part of doing business in the state of Minnesota, and I think Hennepin County has been very lucky in being able to obtain those resources so that there is safety in the courtroom and in the judicial process. And previously, our child support courtrooms used to be right next to a housing court where the death occurred that started this whole process of getting weapons detection in.
Very important issues. In terms of racial and gender disparity, you mentioned that there were some recommendations that have been made. And did the Supreme Court take those recommendations? Are they going to be working to address some of these issues?
It's an ongoing process, but yes, the Supreme Court adopted the recommendations from the Gender Fairness Committee about issues of determining when domestic fatality can be reduced and avoided, and our recommendations regarding sentencing guidelines, when bench warrants should be issued, what factors should be considered, and other information that's pertinent to reducing disparate effect based upon race and gender.
And when you look at our court system, do we have enough judges, frankly, to handle the amount of cases that you see coming before you?
I think the judges are doing the best that they can with the resources available. So if there are more resources, then yes, there could be better, more qualitative outcomes. But at this point, I can't tell you enough about whether we have enough judges, but I think our system could be improved if we had more resources.
I'm assuming, too, that as a legal professional, you participate with the Bar Association, and I know the Bar has a family law division, too. What would you say are some of the key developments to be watching in the evolution of family law as we look ahead to the next few years?
In family law, we are now looking at how parenting time affects children and how to ensure that both parents are actively involved not just economically, but emotionally and socially in their children's lives in a healthy manner. And I think a lot of litigation and legislation is being put forth to address that, because we want both parents involved, but we want them to do it in a healthy way and in a way that impacts positively on the children's lives.
And hasn't it been the case that there's been more a tendency for the courts to grant what's known as joint custody, and with regular visitation rights for the parent who may be the non-custodial parent? Hasn't that become more common, and the standard has been the courts are going to make decisions based on what is in the best interests of the child, right? Isn't that the current state of our law?
The current state of the law is everyone starts with a clean slate when you come into the courtroom. So there's no presumption that one gender will get that child as the custodial parent. So they look at all these factors to determine which parent can be the best parent and be the primary parent, and they also consider whether joint physical custody will be a positive things in the child's life. And it is a best interest standard, and we're lucky to be able to do that and to provide what is best for that child.
And the best interest standard, that's not strictly an economic calculation, is it?
No, it is not.
It's looking at a lot of different factors
It certainly is.
that you have to consider when making those choices.
It certainly is, yes. And I think we're very fortunate to be in an environment which is looking at what is important for a child and how we can all effectively participate in making sure that that child grows up into a healthy human being or an adult and has good access to both parents.
And I see our time is starting to wind down, and Sangeeta, I have to bring up, I think that your career is very inspirational, obviously, to a lot of people, a lot of women, a lot of people of color who may be considering careers in the law or doing public service. Tell us about some of the work that you've done there to try to motivate people too.
Well, when I served in San Diego, I was the only person of color as a prosecutor. And when I served in Ramsey County, it just so happened that I was the only person of color as a prosecutor again. So I saw the need for diversity and used that need to go out and speak to people and encourage and mentor others in becoming part of the system, so we can use different voices to make the whole a better place and to learn from each other.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much for this discussion today. We come to realize many of us don't have contact regularly with the courts, but when we do, it's good to know that there's a person such as yourself who is really trying to do justice and is listening carefully to the parties that come before them and doing the best job that you can and trying to apply the law and to be fair to people. That's what it's about.
And thank you for allowing this opportunity to talk to the public and educate them all. Thank you so much.
Sangeeta Jain, Magistrate in the Child Support Family Court, Hennepin County, thank you for appearing on Access to Democracy.
Thank you.